I still remember that moment with perfect clarity. The moment my whole life split into two parts, before and after. I was standing on the stage. The lights were shining straight into my eyes. 3,000 people below me. Applause filled the room as the host read my name. Valedictorian Emily Carter. I stepped forward. Slowly. Steadily. At least, on the outside. Inside it felt like my head was being crushed. The pain had been there for days. But I ignored it. Like I had always ignored everything else. I looked down at the audience, searching for something familiar. A face. A glance. A sign that I wasn't alone. And then I saw them. 2 empty seats. Front row. Name cards attached. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. No one was there. No one came. If you've ever had a moment when you realized you didn't belong in your own family, comment 1. I thought I was used to it. I really did. I thought it didn't affect me anymore. The times they didn't show up. The times they forgot. The times I had to do everything on my own. I thought I was strong. Independent. That I didn't need anyone. But the truth is, there are some things you don't realize you need until you're standing in front of 3,000 people. And not a single one of them is your family. I took a breath, tightened my grip on the speech in my hand. Thank you all for being here today. I began. My voice was steady, clear, exactly the way I had practiced it dozens of times. But then, something felt wrong. My vision began to narrow, as if someone were pulling a black curtain in from both sides. The noise started drifting farther away. The pain wasn't pain anymore. It was pressure. Something crushing my skull from the inside. I tried to keep going. We stand here today, not only because of achievement. The words began slipping away. I couldn't see the audience anymore. Couldn't see the lights. Couldn't see anything at all. Except a memory. A small kitchen. My mother flipping through wedding magazines. Not looking at me. Your sister needs to come first. I blinked. Tried to return to the present. But it was too late. The world spun. The microphone slipped from my hand. And then, everything went black. The last thing I heard was someone screaming, "Call an ambulance." And another voice, "Call her family." I wanted to laugh. I really did. Even as I was falling into the dark, I still thought, they're not going to answer. I used to think the day I collapsed on that stage was the beginning of everything, but it wasn't. It was only the result of a long chain of being overlooked, dismissed, and always placed last. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 22 years old. If you look at the family photos along the hallway of our house in Seattle, you'll notice something. In almost every picture, I stand at the edge, not because I chose it, but because that's where I was placed. In the center is always my sister Sophia, confident, composed, exactly who my parents wanted, and me just the background. About 4 weeks before graduation, everything became clearer. I stood in the kitchen one morning, the smell of coffee, sunlight through the window. My mother sat at the table flipping through wedding magazines for Sophia. "Emily, can you pick up some samples from the print shop this weekend?" she said without looking at me. I told her I had final exams. She sighed and said I would manage like I always do. That's what people always said about me. Independent, strong, doesn't need anyone. But no one ever asked why I had to become that way. I worked 25 hours a week at a cafe, kept a perfect GPA, paid my rent, and handled everything on my own. Meanwhile, Sophia's tuition was fully covered, no questions asked. That night, Sophia walked into my room without knocking. She asked if I had used her hairspray. I said no. She barely looked at me, then casually said, "Congratulations about my valedictorian title," like it meant nothing, and walked out. No pause, no interest. I picked up my phone and called my grandfather. He answered quickly. Just hearing him say my name made something in my chest ease. For the first time in weeks, I told the truth. About the pressure, the speech, and the fear of standing in front of thousands of people without knowing if anyone in my family would be there. He listened quietly. Then he told me he would come and sit in the front row. He said he wouldn't miss it. A week before graduation, my body started to change. The headaches became constant, heavy and unrelenting. I told myself it was stress. I kept working, kept pushing because stopping was not an option. No one was going to take my place. One night after work, my mother called. She told me to come home for Sophia's engagement party. I said I couldn't because of work. She told me to call in sick. I asked what about me. There was silence then. She said it was just one weekend. That was always the answer. Just one weekend. Just one more time. Later that night, my nose started bleeding and wouldn't stop. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized who I was. I knew I should go to a doctor, but I didn't have the time or the money. More than that, I didn't have anyone telling me to stop and take care of myself. The next evening, my friend Rachel showed up with food. She looked at me and said I was falling apart. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. She said I was destroying myself for people who didn't even see me. I told her they would come to my graduation. She asked if they had ever come before. I couldn't answer. That night, while brushing my teeth, everything started to blur. My vision doubled. I had to grab the sink to stay upright. The pain came back stronger than ever, like something was pressing inside my head. Still, I told myself to hold on a little longer. Just get through graduation. Then I would rest. I didn't realize my body was already giving up on me the same way my family had done for years. I thought, if I tried a little harder, just a little more, things would be different. But that night I realized something. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that I was never the one they chose. The engagement party was held in our backyard. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Warm lights hanging from the trees, white tablecloths, glasses of champagne reflecting the glow. Around 40 guests, all well-dressed, laughing and celebrating. It was the kind of evening people longed to be part of. Except me. I spent 6 hours moving quietly between tasks, arranging chairs, setting tables, pouring drinks, cleaning up. No one asked if I was okay. No one told me to rest. In their eyes, this was my role. The one who supports, who stays in the background, who is always there but never truly seen. My mother called out for more champagne. I nodded, picked up the bottle, and walked through the crowd with a practiced smile. My head was pounding, but I kept going. Across the yard, Sophia stood by the fountain, glowing confident, as if everything in the world revolved around her. And maybe it did. She called everyone's attention and pulled me closer. For a brief moment, I thought things might be different, that she might say something kind. Instead, she laughed and said I was the one who did everything in the house. People chuckled. I smiled automatically. Then she added that I was good at helping, and that I would probably become a teacher, joking about wiping children's noses all day. The laughter grew louder. I kept smiling, but something inside me cracked. When she mentioned my graduation, she spoke as if it barely mattered. When I corrected her on the word valedictorian, she brushed it off and said I had always been the smart one, then casually compared it to the expensive things she owned, implying that none of it really mattered. The room laughed again. This time I didn't. I walked away. No one noticed. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter and tried to breathe. Through the window, I saw an older man watching me. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He simply acknowledged me. A quiet understanding passed between us. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It said that my grandfather should know how I was being treated. When I looked up again, the man had turned away. My hands were shaking, but not from embarrassment anymore. For the first time, someone had seen me. But even that was not the worst part. I thought being humiliated in front of everyone was the lowest point. I was wrong. Later, while I was alone in the kitchen washing dishes, I could still hear laughter from the living room. They were going through photos, talking, enjoying the night. My mother walked in slightly flushed from drinking but clearly pleased. She told me the family was going to Paris to celebrate the engagement. Next week. It took me a moment to understand. Next week was my graduation. I said it quietly. She waved it off, saying the tickets were already booked. I waited for something more, for her to say they would stay, that I mattered. But nothing came. She simply said I would do fine on my own, that I didn't need them there. My father appeared at the doorway. He didn't look at me. He said the family had already decided. My sister needed them more. I asked about myself. There was a short silence. Then he said I was strong, that I could take care of myself. That silence said everything. I nodded and didn't argue. When I stepped outside, the world started to spin. The pain returned sharper than before. I held onto the wall to stay upright. My mother's voice called from behind, asking if I was okay. I answered the way I always did. I said I was fine. But this time I knew I wasn't. That night I sat alone in my car in the dark. No lights, no music, just silence. I cried. Not because I was humiliated and not because I was abandoned. I cried because for the first time in my life I could no longer lie to myself. My family did not just fail to choose me. They chose not to choose me. 3 days later, my body could no longer hold on, and what happened next changed my life completely. I thought I could endure just a little longer, just 3 more days. 3 days to finish my speech, to step onto that stage, to prove that everything I had gone through meant something. I believed I was in control, but my body thought otherwise. 3 days before graduation, I could barely get off the floor. Not because I didn't want to, but because standing up had become too difficult. I lay there staring at the ceiling, at a water stain shaped like a broken heart. Every time I tried to sit up, it felt like something was pulling me back down. The pain was no longer dull. It was sharp, heavy, and constant. Rachel called me. I didn't want to answer, but I did. She could hear it in my voice immediately. She said I sounded like I was about to pass out. I told her I was fine. She didn't accept it. She reminded me that I had nearly fainted at work, that I had nosebleeds twice in 1 week. Then she said something that made me stop. She said my body was not okay and that I didn't have time to ignore it. I tried to argue. I said I didn't have time to be sick. I still had my speech, my graduation. She answered that I also had my life. That silence after her words stayed with me. I knew she was right, but something inside me refused to stop. Not because I was strong, but because I was used to pushing through no matter what. I told her I would go to the hospital after graduation. She didn't agree, but she didn't fight me anymore. She just told me that if anything happened, I should call my grandfather. She said he was the only one who would come. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. That night I couldn't sleep. The pain grew worse with each passing hour, like something inside my head was expanding, pressing outward. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. This time it was different. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't keep my balance. I stumbled into the bathroom and turned on the light. Then I saw the blood. It was heavier than before, faster, harder to control. I leaned over the sink trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. It took nearly 20 minutes before it slowed down. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't recognize the person staring back. Pale skin, hollow eyes, dry lips. Someone completely drained. I knew I should go to the hospital. The thought was clear, undeniable. But then I looked at my desk. My speech was there, pages marked and rewritten over and over again. I had come too far. I told myself I only needed 1 more day. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. My finger stopped on my grandfather's name. I remembered what Rachel said. If anything happened, call him. I hesitated. Then I didn't call. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to give anyone another reason to worry about me. I put the phone down, took painkillers, and lay back in bed. I told myself I just needed 1 more day. But deep inside, something whispered that I might not have that day left. The next morning, I still got up. I got dressed, prepared like everything was normal, as if the night before had never happened. Rachel picked me up. She looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. I told her I was just tired. She didn't argue. She handed me food and told me to eat. I tried, but my body resisted. She didn't say anything more, but I could see it. She was scared. I told her that after today I would go to the doctor. She looked at me for a long moment as if deciding whether to believe me. Then she nodded and said after today. I nodded back, but deep down I knew something she didn't. There was a chance I would never make it to after today. And then the next day I stepped onto that stage. You already know what happened next, but there is a part I haven't told yet. The part I didn't see. What happened after I collapsed? And how my family made their choice once again. I don't remember how I fell. I don't remember how they carried me off the stage or the screams or the panic in the eyes of thousands of people. Everything that happened after that I only know through others. And sometimes I wish I didn't know at all. Rachel told me that the moment I hit the ground, the entire hall fell into chaos. It was no longer a graduation ceremony. The applause was gone. People stood up, rushed forward, called for help. She was the first to run onto the stage. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She just ran. She knelt beside me, held my face, called my name. But I didn't respond. I didn't move. I didn't answer. My grandfather followed slower, not because he didn't care, but because age had slowed him down. Every step he took toward me was heavy but steady. When he held my hand, Rachel said he didn't speak right away. He just held on tightly as if letting go would mean losing me. Then he said quietly, "I'm here. If anyone ever asks what love looks like, I would say it looks like an 80-year-old man standing in the middle of chaos, refusing to let go of your hand." The ambulance arrived after 14 minutes, but to Rachel it felt like hours. I never regained consciousness during the ride. At the hospital, everything moved fast. Too fast for anyone to fully understand. Scans, doctors moving quickly, voices low and urgent. Then one doctor stopped, looked at Rachel, looked at my grandfather, and said there was a tumor. Just 2 words, but enough to change everything. Rachel didn't understand all the details, but she understood one thing. It was serious. The doctor said they needed to operate immediately, within an hour. 1 hour to decide, 1 hour to act. They needed a family member to sign the consent forms. Rachel took my phone and called my mother. The first call was not answered. The second, the third, nothing. She left a message, her voice shaking, saying I was in critical condition and needed them. There was no response. My grandfather called my father. This time someone answered. He said he was at the airport as if it were just another ordinary moment. My grandfather told him everything. That I had collapsed. That I had a brain tumor. That surgery was urgent. There was silence. Then my father said they were about to board the plane. Rachel told me she had never seen someone's expression change as quickly as my grandfather's did in that moment. He said clearly that his daughter was about to go into surgery, that this was about her life. And the only reply he received was that there was nothing they could do by staying. One sentence. Calm. Final. In that moment, everything was cut off. Rachel said she wanted to grab the phone to scream, to force them to come back. But my grandfather didn't do that. He simply said that if they got on that plane, they should not call him again. There was a pause. Then the call ended. They boarded the plane. They chose to leave. Not because they didn't know. Not because they didn't understand. But because they made a choice. My grandfather signed the consent forms. Not just as a grandfather, but as the only one left. Rachel stood beside me, holding my hand one last time before I was taken into surgery. She told me I wasn't alone. Then the doors closed. Outside, 2 people stayed, a friend and a grandfather. My family, meanwhile, was thousands of feet in the air, flying to Paris, choosing lights over a hospital room, champagne over an emergency. And I was lying on an operating table somewhere between life and death, not knowing that the most painful part had not even come yet. The first thing I saw was white. A white ceiling, white walls, harsh white lights. Everything was so clean it felt cold. I didn't know where I was or how much time had passed. I only knew that my body felt heavy, like it no longer belonged to me. I tried to move just a little, but a sharp pain stretched from my head down to my neck. It wasn't as violent as before, but it was enough to remind me that something serious had happened. Then I heard a voice calling my name. It was trembling, trying to stay calm. I turned my head slowly and saw Rachel. Her eyes were red, her hair messy like she hadn't slept for days. She said I was awake, but her voice broke at the end. My grandfather woke up too, sitting up quickly from the chair beside me. He was still wearing the same clothes from graduation, as if he had never left. He took my hand and held it tightly. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and no sound came out. Rachel understood immediately and gave me a small sip of water. I asked what had happened. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Rachel and my grandfather exchanged a quick look. Then she told me I had a brain tumor, that they had already operated and removed it. Everything went quiet after that. I asked how long it had been. She said 3 days. 3 days. 3 days where I didn't exist. 3 days between life and death. I looked around the room. There were no flowers, no cards, no sign that I had just gone through something that should have brought my family running. I started to ask about my parents, but Rachel didn't answer. My grandfather gently squeezed my hand and told me to rest. The way he avoided the question was already an answer. I asked for my phone. Rachel hesitated for a second before handing it to me. That was enough for me to know something was wrong. I opened it and saw notifications, many of them, but none from my family. I opened Instagram, and then I saw it. A photo of my parents and Sophia standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, smiling under the sunset. The caption said they were finally enjoying a family trip with no stress and no drama. I read it again, and again. No stress, no drama. I didn't know what I was in that sentence. Stress or drama. I kept scrolling. More photos, more laughter, more moments. No trace of me anywhere. Rachel said my name, but I didn't hear her anymore. I didn't cry or scream. I just stopped. Something inside me shut down. Not pain, not sadness, just emptiness. My grandfather told me they knew. He had called them. I nodded. They still went. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. He didn't need to answer. I looked at the photo one last time, then turned off the screen. I said I was fine. Rachel asked if I really was. I nodded, not because I was okay, but because there was nothing left in me to break. 4 days after the surgery, I began to recover. Slowly but steadily. The doctor said I was lucky. A few days later, and things could have been very different. I listened, but I felt nothing. Rachel stayed every day. My grandfather too. Two people who chose to stay. And I started to understand something. Family is not about blood. It is about who chooses not to leave. Then my phone lit up. A missed call from my father. Then another. Then more. Messages started coming in, telling me to call back, saying it was urgent. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one said they were sorry. Only that they needed me. I stared at the screen in silence. A strange feeling appeared. Not pain, but clarity. Something was very clear now. I asked my grandfather what was going on. He looked at me longer than usual, then said it was time I knew the truth. At that moment, I didn't realize those calls and messages were not the beginning of regret. They were the beginning of something else. Something that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with money. I used to think the worst pain in my life was being left behind. Left behind on that stage, left behind in the hospital, left behind in their lives. But then I realized there was something worse. It was when they came back, not because they missed you, but because they needed you. My phone kept vibrating, missed call after missed call. My father's name kept appearing on the screen over and over again. Rachel saw it too, but she said nothing. I opened the messages. He told me to call back, said it was urgent, asked where I was. Not a single message asked if I was okay. Not one apology. Just demands. My mother's message told me to call my father because something important had happened. Sophia's message said it was serious and that I needed to respond. I looked at the screen, then turned it off. The silence that followed felt heavy. Rachel asked if I was going to call back. I told her I didn't know. Not because I was still angry, but because I couldn't feel anything clearly anymore. There was only a cold emptiness. I turned to my grandfather and asked what was going on. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me for a long time as if deciding whether I was ready to hear it. Then he said there was something he had kept from me. He told me that when I was born, my grandmother had left money for me. Not for college, but something she called a freedom fund. It was meant for when I grew up so I could choose my own life. The words felt heavier than I expected. I asked how much. He said enough for me to start over. My heart began to race. I asked if my parents knew. He shook his head. He had never told them. Then I asked why they were suddenly calling. He sighed and said that he had told them. While I was in surgery, he had called my father. He told him that if they didn't come back, he would make sure the money went directly to me. Everything clicked into place. They weren't calling because of me. They were calling because of the money. I leaned back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. All the pieces started to connect. The tuition I had to cover on my own. The times I was told the family didn't have enough money. The way Sophia never lacked anything. I asked my grandfather if he had ever given money to my parents before. He hesitated, then said yes. For both of us. I closed my eyes. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew. The money didn't disappear. It just never reached me. My phone lit up again. This time it was a message from my father. He said I needed to understand that this was a family matter. I looked at that word, family. For the first time it meant nothing. Rachel asked what I was going to do. I looked at her, then at my grandfather. Two people who stayed without conditions, without expectations. Then I looked back at my phone. 65 missed calls, all after they learned about the money. I said I would call back. Not for them, but because I wanted to hear what they would say. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, then he answered immediately. He said my name quickly, tense, as if he had been waiting. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He just started talking. In that moment, I understood something clearly. This call was not about fixing anything. It was the beginning of a confrontation. I thought that after that call, everything was clear. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. The next afternoon, the hospital room door opened without a knock. My mother walked in first, her heels echoing against the floor. Her eyes scanned the room quickly as if assessing the situation. She called my name in a tone that sounded almost normal, as if I had only been mildly ill. I looked at her but said nothing. My father followed behind, avoiding eye contact, silent as always. Then Sophia walked in last, still holding a shopping bag completely out of place in a hospital room. She greeted me casually, as if we were meeting somewhere ordinary. Rachel stood up. She didn't say anything at first, but the anger in her eyes was obvious. My mother suggested they speak privately and looked directly at Rachel. Rachel refused immediately. She said she was there when I was taken into surgery, and when I woke up while they were not. The room fell into a heavy silence. Then the door opened again, and my grandfather walked in. He didn't raise his voice, but the atmosphere shifted instantly. He said they had finally arrived. My father stiffened. When he tried to speak, my grandfather cut him off, saying he didn't want to hear any explanations. My mother stepped forward and said they came for me. My grandfather answered that they came for something else. No one argued. I sat there looking at each of them. For the first time, I didn't feel shaken. I asked why they had been calling me. No hesitation, no avoidance. My father spoke first. He said it was complicated. I told him it wasn't. Then he said I needed to understand that the money was family property. I let out a quiet laugh. The word family sounded unfamiliar. I told them the fund was left to me. My mother tried to interrupt, saying I was too young to understand. I told her I understood very clearly. I understood that while I was in surgery, they were in Paris. I understood that the calls only came after they learned about the money. My father looked away. I said that if there had been no money, they would not be standing there. No one denied it. Sophia spoke next, saying I was overreacting. She said they had come back. Rachel reminded her it had taken 5 days. Sophia tried to dismiss her, but I told her to speak to me instead. I said she had believed I wasn't important enough for them to stay. She denied it, saying no one realized how serious it was. I answered that she never even asked. I repeated it. She never asked. She posted photos, went shopping, celebrated, but never once asked about me. She had nothing to say after that. My mother started crying. She apologized for the first time, but it came too late. I told her I knew, but it didn't change anything. She looked at me as if searching for the person I used to be, someone who would forgive and move on, but that person was gone. My father asked what I wanted. The question made me pause, not because I didn't know, but because it was the first time I was allowed to decide. I looked at my grandfather and Rachel, the two people who stayed without conditions. Then I turned back. I said I wanted them to understand that I would not stay silent anymore. The room went still. I told them the money did not belong to the family, it belonged to me. My mother shook her head and said I was breaking the family. I looked at her and said no. The family had been broken a long time ago. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Because for the first time the truth had been spoken. Clearly, completely, and without taking it back. I thought everything had ended there. The truth had been spoken. Everything was clear. But then my mother said something that made everything I had believed begin to shift. She asked if I wanted to know why. Her voice was no longer controlled. It sounded worn, almost fragile. No one answered. She repeated the question, asking why she had treated me the way she did. I looked at her and asked the same thing. Why? The silence that followed felt heavy. Then she said it was because I reminded her of someone. My grandmother. At first I didn't understand. She explained that every time she looked at me, she saw the woman who had made her feel like she was never good enough. She spoke about 30 years of living in comparison of being judged of never measuring up. When my grandmother passed away, she thought it was finally over. Then I was born, and I looked like her. The same eyes, the same face, the same presence. Rachel tried to speak, saying I had only been a child, but my mother raised her voice, saying she knew that. Then her voice broke again. She said that every time she looked at me, all those feelings came back. The inadequacy, the pressure, the sense of being judged. It never left her. The room fell silent again. I realized then what she was saying, that I had been carrying something that was never mine. I told her that she had punished me for someone I had never even met. She didn't deny it. That was enough. I looked down at my hands, at the marks left by needles and bruises. I thought about all the times I had tried. The nights I stayed awake, the extra shifts, the constant effort to prove I was worth something. I had always believed that if I tried hard enough, they would finally see me. But they never did. Because they weren't looking at me. They were looking at someone else. I asked her what I had done wrong. For the first time, my voice wasn't steady. She cried and said I had done nothing wrong. Then I asked why I had to pay for it. No one answered. There was no answer that could justify it. I took a deep breath and said I understood. I understood why she felt the way she did. For a brief moment I saw hope in her eyes. But I continued. I said that understanding it did not make it right. I told her I had spent 22 years trying to be loved, trying to be seen, trying to be enough. Then I told her that I was not my grandmother. I was myself. The room went quiet again. I said I could not keep living as the cost of her past. A tear fell, but it was not weakness. It felt like an ending. I told her I did not blame her, but I could not continue the way things were. For the first time, I didn't call her mother. I used a distance that even I could feel. She tried to say my name, but I stopped her. I said I needed time, I needed space, and I needed to live my own life. No one argued. Because for the first time, I was not asking for permission. I was making a decision. I used to think leaving would be a dramatic moment, a loud decision, a turning point where everything changed instantly. But the truth is, I didn't leave with anger or noise. There was no slammed door, no final speech. I left quietly. 2 weeks after being discharged, I stood in a small apartment I had just rented. One bedroom, nothing special, a window facing a parking lot. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, everything in that space was chosen by me. No one told me where things should go. No one expected anything from me. At first, the silence felt strange. There were no voices calling my name, no constant requests, no pressure to be useful, just me, and a question I had never truly answered before. Who am I when I'm not trying to please anyone else? Rachel helped me move in. She looked around and said it was small but good enough. I agreed. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I used a small part of my grandmother's fund to cover rent. Not much, just enough to breathe. For the first time, I didn't have to calculate every shift, every extra hour of work just to survive. In the days that followed, things began to change. Slowly, but clearly. Sophia blocked me on everything. Her profile now suggested that some people don't appreciate family. Rachel showed me, but I didn't react. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood. Some people only know how to love when everything revolves around them. A week later, Rachel called me with unexpected news. Tyler had found out everything. About the hospital, about Paris, about how things really happened. His family didn't take it well. They didn't want their son tied to a family like that. He was reconsidering the engagement. I didn't feel satisfaction. No relief, no revenge. Just a quiet stillness. I told Rachel I didn't want that to happen. She said sometimes the truth takes care of things on its own. 2 weeks later, the engagement post disappeared. The announcement was gone as if it had never existed. My mother sent me a message saying my sister was upset and asking if I was satisfied. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying that I wasn't happy she was hurt, but I wasn't responsible for it either. There was no response. My father started calling regularly. Same day, each week, same time. The first time he asked what I had eaten for dinner. It was such a simple question that it almost felt unreal. I answered. There was silence after, but it wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. Then he asked if I was feeling better. It was a small question, but it was the first time he had asked. I realized then that not everyone changes all at once. Sometimes change begins with something very small. 3 months later, I stood in a different room. My classroom. 26 desks, a whiteboard, a small reading corner with books I had bought secondhand. On the wall, I hung a sign that said "Every voice matters." Rachel stood behind me eating a snack and asked if I wrote that for the kids or for myself. I said both. My grandfather called. He asked if I was ready. Then he told me my grandmother would be proud. I looked around the room at the life I was building. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. For the first time, I believed that. But I didn't know the story wasn't over. 1 year later, a call would come. From someone who used to be at the center of everything. Someone who once had it all. And now had nothing left. I thought my story ended there, in that small apartment, in my classroom, in a life I rebuilt on my own, but life rarely ends that neatly. 1 year later, I was sitting in my classroom during lunch break. Sunlight came through the window. The students had all gone home. The silence felt familiar. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I looked at it for a moment, then answered. Emily. I recognized the voice immediately. Sophia. But it wasn't the same voice I remembered. It wasn't confident or sharp. It was quiet, fragile, almost breaking. She said it was her and asked if she could talk. For the first time in her life, she was asking me. I told her I was listening. There was a long pause. Then she said Tyler had left. This time for real. His family didn't want to be involved with ours anymore. She laughed softly, but it sounded empty. She said she was in debt now. Credit cards, expenses, things she had never had to think about before. She didn't know what to do. I stayed silent. Then she said she was calling because I was the only person who didn't want anything from her. That sentence stayed in the air. I remembered everything. What she had said, what she had done. The times I stood in the background while she stood in the center. A part of me wanted to ask if she understood now. Wanted her to feel exactly what I had felt. But I didn't. because I didn't want to become like them. I told her I was sorry about Tyler, but I couldn't fix her situation. My voice wasn't cold or angry, just clear. She said she knew. She wasn't calling to ask for money. She said she was calling because she didn't want to lose me completely. Then she said something I had never heard from her before. She admitted she had been unfair, that she didn't fully understand why, that everything had always come easily to her while I had to fight for everything. Her voice broke as she said it. She thought maybe she had been jealous. I closed my eyes. Not from pain, but because for the first time she was being honest. She asked if we could go back to how things were. That question made me stop. I didn't answer immediately. For once I truly thought about it. Then I said I didn't know. But if she really wanted to change, I was willing to try. She sounded surprised. I told her it wouldn't be the same as before. I wasn't someone who would endure everything anymore. And if she wanted this, she had to change for real, not just with words. She said she understood. For the first time, she didn't argue. We ended the call without a perfect resolution. No closure, no emotional reunion, just a door slightly open. 2 years later, I was sitting in a large hall. Bright lights, many people. My grandfather walked onto the stage to receive an award. But he didn't talk about himself. He talked about me. He spoke about the girl who once stood on a stage and collapsed. Not just from illness, but from carrying too much alone. The room went quiet. He said what made him proud wasn't that I stood up again, but that I chose to live my own life. I couldn't hold back my tears. Rachel beside me was crying too. He said my grandmother once believed that the ones who are overlooked are the ones who most deserve to be remembered. Then he looked at me and said, I had shown him what that truly meant. After the ceremony, I held him tightly. I told him I was proud of him. He said he felt the same. I walked out of the hall into the soft light of the afternoon. I stood there alone, but I didn't feel lonely anymore. Because for the first time I understood something clearly. Family is not about who you are born to. It is about who stays. And more importantly, it is about learning how to stay with yourself. I used to think love was something you had to earn, something you had to prove you deserved. Now I know it is something you choose. And sometimes the first person you have to choose is yourself. If you have ever been the one left behind, the one who always tries, the one who is never seen, remember this. You do not have to burn yourself to keep others warm. Especially when they never look at the flame. You deserve to be seen, to be loved, and to be chosen. Starting with yourself.